ranking every soldier hat that can be an unusual quality based on profitability and sellability, starting from the bottom up. I've already laid out the rules in the unusual scout hat tier list and in the description, and as a reminder, this is based on my experience and research where there will be exceptions. Let's begin. The Polar Charger is a commander grade soldier hat released in the recent Smithsmith 2024 update, and as of this upload, there are only 75 unusual variants in existence, and it's the only unpriced soldier unusual hat. Although it's unpriced and you're likely not going to find any sales of this hat, I think it looks amazing, and particularly the buy orders on this hat, even on case effects, are very high, which suggests that there's a lot of demand for this hat, and I would put it around the A to B tier here. But because there are no sales to back it up, it's going in N/A for now. Next is the Elf Defense. It's a mercenary grade soldier hat from Smithsmith 2021, and immediately I'm putting this into F tier. Similar to the big elfin deal from the previous video, many Christmas themed hats in TF2 just sell terribly due to very high supply and a lack of demand, or they're just plain ugly, resulting in flooded markets. Just check out this Blizzardy Storm Elf Defense, which you could argue is themed, stuck with me on marketplace.tf for over 2 years with absolutely zero offers, with additional other sellers experiencing the same thing. No matter what effect you look at, it's extremely cheap and always unsold, which should tell you how bad this hat really is. Next is the Bazaar Bauble, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the summer 2020 pack, and this is going in F tier as well for similar reasons. It's generally perceived as ugly, the markets are flooded, even nice effects such as Cloud9 and the popular case effects are unsold for several months. I just see no way you're gonna make good profit out of this hat, or even sell it fast. Next is the Tank Top, which is a commander grade soldier hat from the Scream Fortress 2018 collection. I will put this hat in E tier as, again, it's ugly, the markets are flooded on many effects, and it very often doesn't sell even on good effects. Take the Dark Doorway or the Eldritch Opening as an example, where there are 5 sellers who have been here for several months with probably no offers. I myself have only ever owned one unusual tank top in the last 2 years, which was a Ring of Fire, and I ended up re-quick selling it. It's not F tier because I believe that if you could find the golden ticket of an empty market, a popular effect, and a cheap deal, it's profitable, but it's gonna be an E tier regardless. Next is the Firearm Protector, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Scream Fortress 2022 collection. I would put this in D tier as there are definitely some effects, namely its case effects, which sell really well even if supply is high. However, most effects such as generic and limited effects sell poorly most of the time. It's still perceived as one of those low tier hats, so I would say roughly 25% of the effects sell well, and then the rest don't sell well, which fits the mediocre tier criteria the most. Next is the Calamitous Cauldron, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Scream Fortress 2020 collection. I would put this hat in E tier, as the supply on this hat is super high, yet many effects are unsold for several months on almost every effect, likely because it looks bad. I've never sold this hat before, but the only reason why I'm not saying F tier is because I think that there are a handful of limited effects that could get some considerable offers, but that's it. Like 97% of the time, this hat is garbage. Next is the Bold Bonnet, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Smithsmith 2022 collection. I would put it in D tier because I've sold it many times before for profit, and there are actually some effects which sell pretty decently. However, there are also some effects which are flooded and difficult to sell. It's not the best looking hat, but this can be offset with some paint as it has a good paint region. My conclusion here is that this hat has potential as long as you are able to pick and choose the correct markets to buy deals off and resell. Next is the Crackpot, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Smithsmith 2018 collection. I would put this in E tier as this hat is very poor looking and the profit margins are extremely tight on low tier effects, and on high tier effects, it rarely ever sells. Next is the Roaming Roman, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the summer 2021 collection. I'd put it in C tier as although it can sell quite slowly according to many of the current sellers' listings, it has a wide variety of effects which have good profit margins. So a lot of the time, you have the trade-off of waiting a while for a good opportunity to capitalize on when dealing with the Roaming Roman. Next is the Sky High Fly Guy, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Blue Moon collection released in early 2018. Overall, I would put it in D tier as the supply on this hat is extremely high amongst generic effects, which would be and used to make it an F tier unusual soldier hat, but it gets balanced out by the abundant amount of limited effects nowadays, which has its own market and several opportunities to capitalize on, so I think that D tier is a fair balanced standpoint. Next is the Semi-tame Trapper's hat, which is a commander grade soldier hat from the Scream Fortress 2020 collection. I would put this in E tier as this hat sells extremely slowly. Sure, the supply isn't high, meaning you likely won't face competition, and it does have past sales over the years on some effects, but it is a struggle to sell because the hat itself is very underwhelming. Next is the zapateador, which is a commander grade soldier hat from the Scream Fortress 2019 collection. I would put this in D tier as its supply isn't very high, but then it has some extremely old listings which are often more than a year old, and often many of these effects are a little bit inflated, so if you pick up one of these, you should definitely expect to hold onto it for a while without many offers coming your way. Next is the Panisher, which is an assassin grade soldier hat from the Summer 2021 collection. I would put it in E tier because although it's an assassin grade hat, this makes it a massive downside because the supply is low, which makes this hat very expensive, but it's not popular whatsoever and it rarely ever sells, no matter what effect is on it. I've had bad experiences with it before, many listings on it are unsold for a while. I would mostly avoid this hat if you're in the trading scene to make profit. Next is the Vampire Vanquisher from the Scream Fortress 2018 collection. I would put this in C tier as it's a decent looking hat, it sells decently, but it also has quite a lot of sellers and it's a little bit inflated. So there are definitely trade-offs you need to consider, but it has the potential to be good. Next is the Dancing Doe, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Summer 2019 collection. I would say it's a D tier hat as it's a solid looking hat which originates from the Ricardo Milos meme if you still remember that, but nonetheless the hat has gotten quite inflated with lots of sellers, so it's usually difficult to make profit on this hat, and I think that the only redeeming quality is its potential to get good offers on good effects which aren't overly inflated. Next is the Hawk Warrior, which is an assassin grade soldier hat from the Summer 2020 collection. It's a mediocre looking hat for a pink grade, and the majority of the time it's difficult to sell, and I think that a select few generic effects and limited effects have the capacity to make good profit, as you're likely to get a good margin. I've also sold a Burning Flames variant of this hat half a year ago for $199.99, but nowadays there are buy orders for 157 keys, which is crazy. Overall, a few people like this hat, and it's uncommon to make profit from this hat fast. Next is the Climbing Commander, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Smithsmith 2018 collection. I would put this hat in B tier as I think it looks pretty nice and it has sold well in the past from my experience, and although it's not outstanding and it is a little bit inflated on some of the effects, the inflation on this hat has drastically gone down recently, so I upgraded this from C tier to B tier. Next is the Steel Shako, released in the 2013 Robotic Boogaloo update, and it's the robo version of the Stout Shako, and I'm putting this in E tier. It looks quite ugly, which I'm sure it was intended to, and it sells extremely slowly according to many of the listings I inspected on the market, whilst having high supply. I would say that it's not F tier only because it seems it can be decent when quick buying and quick selling to make tiny profit margins quickly, but that's it. Next is the Brass Bucket, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Smithsmith 2017 collection, and I would put this in B tier as it's a nice looking hat with a variety of profitable effects. However, it has gotten quite inflated over the years, which can make it difficult to sell, so to balance it out, it's definitely a solid soldier hat to flip. Next is the Gilded Guard, which is a soldier hat released in early 2014. I would put this in D tier as it has very high supply on only 3rd gen effects, and then very low supply on every other effect. This has caused it to become very inflated for how the hat itself looks, and causes it to rarely sell. Next is the Detective, which is a Commando grade soldier hat from the Summer 2022 pack. I would put it in D tier as its generic effects have low supply, which causes them to be really inflated, making no one want to buy them. And also its case effects have quite a low supply as well, since this is a purple grade unusual, whilst these Summer 2022 effects look mediocre at the same time. Overall, the Detective looks decent as a hat, but it sells poorly due to the scarcity and effect possibilities. Next is the Wanderer's Wool, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Smithsmith 2023 collection. I would put it in B tier as, although many of its case effects have lots of sellers and most effects are a little bit inflated, this hat is very popular and has a lot of recent sales to back it up. Next is the Breach and Bomb, which is a commando grade soldier hat from the summer 2020 pack. I would have to put it in E tier because of how inflated this hat is on nearly every effect, alongside the numerous sellers on case effects, which have gone unsold for months. I just don't see how you're going to be able to buy something like a Cloud9 Breach and Bomb, which used to be 16.5 keys at full price, but now has buyers at 38.35 keys, and expect that you're going to make profit. Next is the 1000 Yard Stare, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the summer 2021 pack. I would put it in C tier as although it's noticeably inflated on many effects, it sells pretty well according to past sales. So overall, I would say it's alright as long as you can pick a good market to flip on. Next is the Ground Control, which is a soldier hat from early 2014. I would put it in D tier as it looks pretty good, but it's very inflated due to its supply, and it's very difficult to find recent sales of this hat at its current inflated state. Next is the Control Patrol, which is an assassin grade soldier hat from the summer 2024 pack. Now I'm going to put it in N/A for now, because there are currently only 5 accepted price suggestions, which all are case effects, and are all outdated. Plus the supply of this hat is very low because it's a pink grade hat, but I don't hate it in this case because the hat actually looks very nice. Just looking at how the market currently is, I would say B tier or C tier, but I don't want to jump the gun right now in early 2025, so it goes in N/A. Next is the Condor cap, which is a soldier hat released in late 2014. I would put it in D tier as it looks pretty decent with moderate profit margins, but then it usually has inflation, multiple sellers, and sells slowly according to past sales. Next is the Stout Shako, which is a soldier hat released in 2010. I would have to put it in D tier because it has very high supply, lots of sellers, and slim profit margins, whilst looking quite mediocre in comparison to other soldier hats. Next is the Conquistador, which is a soldier hat released in early 2012, and I would put it in E tier as it's not very popular at all. It has high supply resulting in lots of market competition and slow profit margins, and also if it's often inflated without many recent sales, it's not a good hat to perform in this list. Next is the Screaming Eagle, which is a soldier hat released in late 2014. I would put it in D tier as some effects have some recent sales, but then this hat often has many sellers, it has inflated prices and low profit margins. Next is the Dumbbell, which is an assassin grade soldier hat from the Smithmas 2018 collection, and I'm putting this in F tier as I believe this to be the epitome of cancer TF2 items to sell. Even though this hat is over 6 years old, only 17 effects have ever been priced out of 46, and it's also been very poor looking for an unusual pink grade hat, and it is definitely very inflated due to its supply. The only way you could ever sell this hat is to keep mentioning how it's one of one and so rare to some inexperienced trader who doesn't know any better. Next is the Hellmet Without a Home, which is a soldier hat released in mid 2012. In its current state, I have to put this in E tier because it's often very inflated with many flooded markets competing with each other with no past sales or even a decent profit margin. Next is the Close Quarters Cover, which is a commando grade soldier hat released in summer 2023. I would put it in C tier as, although it's pretty inflated due to its low supply, some effects actually sell pretty consistently at those prices, so I can't argue a hat is bad if it sells well, and therefore I think it's overall alright sellability wise. Next is the Valley Forge, which is a soldier hat released in summer 2013. I would put it in D tier as it's slightly inflated and it's not a popular hat at all, so it's difficult to sell. One of the only good things about this hat is that there aren't that many sellers on most effects, so there could be potential for profit here. Next is the Full Metal Drill Hat, which is the Robo version of the Sergeant's Drill Hat released in mid 2013. I'd put it in D tier as, just like the Valley Forge, it's slightly inflated, but instead of being as unpopular, it has the trade-off of having more sellers. Next is the Soldier's Slope Scopers, which was released in late 2012. I'd have to put it in D tier because it's incredibly inflated on many effects, which has caused it to have barely any recent sales in this hat as a whole, which certainly downgrades its tier level. Next is the Crit Cloak, which is a commando grade soldier hat from the Unleash the Beast collection, and I'm putting this in E tier, which is due to the severe inflation of this hat. This inflation is due to the very low supply of this hat as a result of it being a purple grade unusual, yet it doesn't look very good to make up for it, which makes it hard to sell. I even own at least one right now, which has sat on the classifieds for several months now as well, which doesn't help its tier ranking. Next is the Brain Bucket, which is a soldier hat released in mid 2011. a reference to Plants vs Zombies. I would put it in C tier as I know it's very popular, however this hat, especially in 2025, is extremely inflated and knocks it down several tiers as this would almost be liquid 5 years ago, but now on average it has tripled to quadrupled in price and rarely sells. Only a seriously good deal would make you nice profit on this hat, which isn't easy to get. Next is the Caribbean Conqueror, which is a soldier hat released in summer 2013. I would put it in C tier as it's not a popular hat, it doesn't have many sales, but simultaneously it's rarely inflated and has low supply, so overall it's definitely something I would just call alright. Next is the Racc mann, which is an assassin grade soldier hat from the Scream Fortress 2019 collection. I would put this in D tier as it has typical pink grade unusual rarity inflation, but it's not as bad as the other hats since it's got a decent amount of sales on several effects, although they are quite old. Personally, I'd only buy one of these if I was absolutely sure I would make profit. Next is the Hellmet, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Scream Fortress 2015 collection. I'll put it in C tier as it's from the 5.5 key gargoyle case, which makes it very rare nowadays, which makes it expensive because of its rarity and not because of its look. Generic effects are terrible to sell, but roughly half of the case effects will have decent sales and profitability. Next is the Infernal impaler, which is a soldier hat from the Scream Fortress 2011 collection. I would put it in E tier for several reasons. I've personally never traded with this hat before, which is often due to many sellers, slight inflation, a lack of sales, and let alone recent ones, and it doesn't even look that good. Next is the Lord Cockswains Pith Helmet, which is a soldier hat released in mid 2011. I would put it in D tier as the low tier effects on this hat are extremely inflated with literally zero recent sales, but the higher tier effects I found such as Purple Energy and Sunbeams did manage to recently sell for a reasonable price, so overall I think it's a fair ranking. Next is the Rebel Rouser, which is a soldier hat released in the summer 2013 pack. I would say it's B tier as quite a lot of effects actually sell pretty well up to today, but it has two minor flaws being that some effects have lots of sellers and slight inflation, but other than that it's a pretty good hat to sell from my experience. Next is the Furious Fuka Amigasa, which is a soldier hat released in mid 2011. I would put it in D tier as the amount of sellers is highly abundant and it's slightly inflated on average, but some effects did have some recent sales, which is the most important thing I look for, so its tier ranking is balanced from my experience. Next is the Cloud Crusher, which is a soldier hat released in mid 2013. I would put it in D tier as this hat nowadays is very inflated on average, most often with many sellers, but like the last hat, there actually are a few recent sales on some effects, which is the most important thing, but it's still not a very good hat to profit off. Next is the Jumper's Jeep Cap, which is a soldier hat released in mid 2011. I would put it in D tier as it's often very inflated, sometimes you'll have some competition, but only a handful of hats have recent sales, which you would often notice a very big spike in the last 1 or 2 years as a result of inflation. Next is the Spook Specs, which is a soldier hat released in mid 2014. I would put it in C tier as it's a very popular soldier hat, however it is often very inflated, meaning that you likely could profit off of this hat, but it'd most likely take a while to sell. Next is the Defiant Spartan, which is a soldier hat from the 2010 Australian Christmas update. I would put it in B tier as it's a very popular soldier hat that does sell well, however it is quite inflated on many effects, some of which with multiple sellers. Next is the Slowpoke, which is a soldier hat from Smithsmith 2013. I would put it in B tier similar to the Defiant Spartan, as it does sell pretty decently, however it is slightly inflated, but with much less sellers. Next is the Hellmet, which is a mercenary grade soldier hat from the Jungle Inferno collection. I'll put this hat in A tier because, although it's inflated amongst generic effects, this hat has a ton of opportunities to be highly profitable with limited effects, with very few sellers as it's a blue grade hat that has existed since 2017. Next is the Peacebreaker, which is an elite grade soldier hat from the summer 2019 collection. Now I'm forced into putting this into the N/A tier because literally only 15 of these have existed after over 5 years, and I probably would have put this into F tier because it's an ugly, ultra rarity inflated hat, but if no one watching could get their hands on one, then there's no point in me talking about it. Next is the Grenadier's Soft Cap, which is a soldier hat from 2010. I would put it in C tier because it is often very inflated, but a select few effects are able to sell for these inflated prices okay-ish. Next is the Armored Authority, which is a soldier hat from mid 2011. I'd put it in C tier as it's often very inflated, and only a few effects were able to sell at this inflated price in the last 1 or 2 years. Next is the Lucky Shot, which is the soldier hat from early 2012. I would put it in B tier as although it has often more sellers and is still quite inflated like the last two hats, it sells way more frequently at these high prices, so it definitely deserves to be higher than C tier. Next is the Honcho's headgear, which is a soldier hat from 2011. I'd put it in C tier as it's often very inflated, with even some recent sales being on par with buy orders, but there were some effects that managed to have a sale in the last year at a high price. Next is the Tyrantium helmet, which is a robo version of the Tyrant's helm, released in mid 2013. I would put it in C tier as it's not as inflated as some of the other hats, but it usually has less recent sales and more sellers. Next is the Stainless Pot, which is a soldier hat from 2009. I would put it in A tier because, although yes it is quite inflated and has quite a lot of sellers, this hat sells extremely consistently at these high prices on nearly every effect, so it definitely should rank very high. I'd put it in S tier in a heartbeat if it wasn't so inflated like it was 4 to 5 years ago. Next is the Chieftain's Challenge, which is a soldier hat from 2010. I'd put it in C tier as it sells decently, but it often has a few sellers competing with you as well as a little bit of inflation on most effects. Next is the War Pig, which is a soldier hat from 2012. I'd put it in A tier as it's an extremely popular soldier hat, which makes it expensive because of supply and demand rather than trading bot inflation for once. Although it's not my go-to for making profit, it does sell really well despite being highly priced. Next is the Sergeant's Drill Hat, which is a soldier hat from 2010. I'd put it in C tier as it's quite inflated and it has more sellers on average than the War Pig but sells worse. So basically a lot more downsides, but it still can be profitable with a good market. Next is the Cranial Cow, which is an assassin grade quick switch misc for soldier from the Scream Fortress 2022 collection. I would put it in A tier because although it's extremely rare being a pink grade, it is a quick switch misc, which means it lets you wear two unusuals at the same time by using a glitch, which makes them even more expensive. It's unlikely you get your hands on one, but it certainly has a lot of people eyeing up your hat, just not enough for S tier in my opinion. Next is the Tyrant's Helm, which is a soldier hat from 2009. I'd put it in A tier as it's extremely popular and sells well, with the main trade-offs being slight inflation and quite a few sellers competing with you. Next is the Killer's Kabuto, which is a soldier hat from 2010. I would say it's B tier because it's a popular hat with decent sales, but it is more inflated than the Tyrant's Helm and definitely has more sellers on average, so I'll put it a tier below. Next is the Whirly Warrior, which is a soldier quick switch miss from summer 2013. I have to put this in S tier because it's extremely popular with good sales, and no matter how expensive it is, or no matter how many sellers you're competing with, it's so liquid that you're expected to sell it for a good amount regardless. Next is the Skull Cap. I have to put this in N/A because it's an insanely rare hat to find in unusual quality, as its crate is the Nice Winter Crate 2014, which was only unboxable from December 15, 2014 to February 3, 2015. Next is the Soldier Stash, which is a soldier miss from 2009. I'm automatically putting this in S tier because it's a misc, and that makes it super liquid no matter how expensive this hat will be, and regardless of how many sellers there are. Also, it's important to mention that this hat has no equip region, meaning you can wear as many of these in your loadout as you want. Next is the Exquisite Racc, which is an unusual soldier miss from Australian Christmas 2010. Again, this is automatically S tier because it's super liquid like the Soldier Stash. And again, this unusual has no equip region, which lets you stack 2 or even 3 on at the same time. And lastly is the Cold Front Curb Stompers, which is from the end of the line update in late 2014, and it's going in N/A because only literally 4 of these exist in unusual quality due to the crate being bugged for I literally think like a few minutes. And that's every soldier hat that could be an unusual variant ranked based upon sellability and profitability. Remember that this list is not definitive and that there are many exceptions to the rules. This ranking is merely based upon my experience and research, and I encourage you to do your own digging for the best results. Remember to check out the school group and the Discord server in the top of the description. Thanks for watching this video. Leave a like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and I hope you make a lot of profit and smash your goals this year in 2025. See ya!